Good evening. A rather unseemly war of words has been going on between the operators of and at Ogle Airport. On the one side is Michael Correa and his related businesses, and on the other, many smaller operators and at least two significant operators at the airport. Tonight, we will try to separate propaganda from facts, hopefully the truth from misrepresentations. And I'll begin this by speaking with a number of persons from one side of that war of words. And at my next opportunity, which will not be next week but the following week, because I have a particular guest or guests next week, I will invite the Correas to come on the program to respond to the statements that are likely to be made this evening and to put their side of the story. It's a rather big team I have this evening as my guests. On my far left is Captain Jerry Govaya. Then we have Mr. Seratu Phillips, Mr. Emil Jahan, and Mr. Orlando Charles. Gentlemen, welcome to Plain Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Is this a man's business? Why do we have...
You know, Chris, the president of NATO, and this is not a NATO exercise here tonight, but actually today the president of NATO, who's a woman, was there with us. We have Brioni Tiwari, who is also the accountable manager, there with us. But you know, the aviation industry today is quite interesting because you have the Minister of Aviation is a woman. You have, and I heard Bobby Vera said this a few days ago, you have the Director General of Civil Aviation is a woman. You have the accountable manager of JAGS Aviation is a woman. The accountable manager of Roraima is a woman. And you have the president of NATO as a woman. So I don't believe that we could stand accused at all.
Just look at the representation and let that be the answer. Now, what really is the issue going on at Ogle Airport?
Let me put it in perspective to say this. I believe that once and for all, that the government should launch an investigation into what is going on at Ogle, particularly because there are 10 aircraft operators that operate at Ogle, and nine of them are complaining that there is an atmosphere, an anti-competitive atmosphere, an atmosphere of dominance by one major operator at Ogle, who in a clever way and have been able to create a very serious anti-competitive environment at Ogle with a tremendous amount of dominance that has affected the operations at Ogle in a very significant way. And to say that, I believe we could go back and forth. Certainly, you know, you could speak to us today, you could speak to the Correas a week down the road, but I believe that the time has come when, once and for all, the government should, in fact, launch an investigation to look at what is really going on at Ogle.
Well, each of you represents an operator.
Correct.
Probably would be an operator in your own right. Captain Govaya, in a very general way, indicated what might be the problem. what do you have as your experience that supports a proposition that the government should intervene in this company to address any internal issues or competitive issues, as Captain Gabaya said?
Well, I'm Serato Phillips. I represent Hopkinson Mining and Logistics. Well, you asked a question earlier if this is a man's game. And my response to that is, I was going through some of the pictures that Mr. Gavaya posted on Facebook, and they were all shared around Facebook. And somebody went under one of the photos and said, look at that one token Negro at the back. So when I look at all the pictures, maybe I ask, am I the only black player here? Right? So you ask if it's a man's game. So that's my response to that. My experience with Ogle is, I mean, we're fairly the newest set of operators there. We're private as it is today.
You have aircraft.
Yeah.
Yes, we have aircraft.
How many
there.
aircraft?
We have one plane. So we're the newest, and we have one plane. But our experience with Ogle is, the first thing we'd apply to get a land to build our own hangar. We went through that process, and at the end of that process, whilst going through the process, they called me in for an interview. And
Who's
they
it
would,
they?
sorry, I guess Ogle Airport Inc.
Mm-hmm.
Slash, I personally, I mean, they shares a different view. I have it as Ogle Airport Inc. / Transguyana. Because all the players who are interviewing me are Ogle Airport Inc. and Transguyana. So one of the first thing they asked, I mean, I went through the process, and one of the first thing they asked that I objected against is, they would like to see a business plan for all the business that I will conduct at Ogle Airport Inc. I never submitted that business plan because I think that was kind of like a very off question to ask me. Because here I am at Ogle Airport Inc. There are a lot of operators there. No, I mean Transguyana, they operate a mining operation also.
Correct.
Karai Mining, they do security. They do all the other things that we're involved in terms of being Hopkinson Mining and Logistics. So I just never submitted the business plan. So they would have called the CEO of Hopkinson Mining, which is Sean Hopkinson, and say, your guy is not submitting the business plan. So they called me in for a second meeting. I went back and I don't think it's a need to submit the business plan. But anyway, long story short, I write a small page, a one page, and say that this is my business plan. They accepted it and they say okay. And then they slapped me with a $30 million fee for the land. And then when we got the lease agreement, we looked at that lease agreement and say, we're not signing this thing. And we started calling around other people, which one of the people we called was BK. And BK said he looked at the lease agreement also, and he's not signing that thing. Because that thing is vicious. So this is where so we didn't know that they were having similar issues at Ogle. So we started calling around, and then different people have different issues. And one of the other issues they would have tagged us with recently is that we need to submit a list of all the passengers that is flying in our plane. And we need to pay a landing fee.
Did you ask them why?
They say it's the regulation of the airport and GCAA. And GCAA's regulation is that because we're a private operation, once you're doing a private operation, you're not supposed to pay any passenger's fee to use the airport. This is a commercial operation. When we decide to go commercial, then we will pay that fee.
Your experience, sir? And I take it you support the proposition that Mr. Gavaya, that the government should step in and have an investigation into this.
Yes, I support that wholeheartedly. The problem that we face as small operators is our problem really started when our lease agreement with one of the companies of the Korea group of companies, CAMS, was terminated. And basically we don't have anywhere to go. And the airport is not providing independent facility.
Can I ask you, was it terminated or did it come to an end?
It was terminated, yes.
And was it within the terms of the contract?
That's right, within the terms of the contract. We don't have any problem with that. But the problem that we have is that the airport, the obligation of the airport towards operators at that airport. The airport needs to provide service for operators at that airport, operating at that airport. Now, the similar services that it would provide for the foreign operators is basically the same services that we would require as domestic operators. Like, for instance, we need office space, we need place, we need access to terminal to take our cargo through to our aircraft. So when you cut that off, or you don't have that facility to provide to operators, we're at a serious disadvantage to operate. So that is where our problem started. Like, for instance, one of the other operators, Oxford Aviation, they had a lease arrangement. They were leasing office space from Rime Airways, and that came to an end. And they approached the airport. They requested that service to be provided independently by the airport, and the airport refused to provide that service.
Does the airport have such a service? Ogle Airport Inc.
Yes.
Does it have such a service?
Yes. They provide that. Trans-Guyana Airways is leasing space at the airport terminal actually to handle flights.
So it's Trans-Guyana that provides the service, not Ogle Airport Inc.
No, Ogle Airport Inc. They're actually they have office space or whatever you want to call it there to do handling for aircraft for airlines that they handle. So basically, we approached them requesting for the airport to provide that service to the domestic operators, and it wasn't fruitful at all.
What was the answer?
The answer is that they cannot accommodate us there because a domestic operation is different from international operation, and they don't have the space to accommodate.
But you have a lease to operate the airport.
Sorry?
You have a lease to operate the airport.
That's right, correct.
So it's certain services go with the operation of an airport,
That's right, yeah. So
and they're restricting those services.
that's right.
Is that what you're saying in your particular case?
That's right, correct. So what happened in Oxford case, they had to take
You're not
their
Oxford,
cargo.
though.
No, I'm not Oxford.
Which-
I'm a Hinterland Aviation.
Yes. Good.
But the reason why I'm actually comparing that is that since our office space would have been, or actually is terminated by CAMS, we actually going to be heading down that similar path, like Oxford, whereby
Camels being another Korea
that's right, Korea
company.
group of companies, one of the companies for the Korea group. We would have had to, or in the very near future, we would have to go down that same path that Oxford has gone down, whereby you're going to have to take your cargo to Timeri and operate from Timeri International Airport. And Timeri International Airport is allowing that, but Ogle is not. And mind you, there are two international airports the same. They're doing basically the same thing. So my company would have been going down that path. So the whole thing
But that
about it,
substantially carries up your operating costs, isn't it?
absolutely,
Convenience, etc.
that's right, inconvenience. That's gonna take up our operating costs by a significant amount, as well as it's gonna make you, not competitive with other companies because we compete with Air Services, with Rima, with even Trans-Guyana to some extent. We're independent operators. So basically we want to have independent facilities provided by the airport to independent operators.
What's been your experience there?
All right, I am Orlando Charles from Domestic Airways and Phoenix Airways. I've been in Ogle as a pilot for almost 15 years.
15.
15 years. Have witnessed the transition of Ogle over time. Having said that, I knew what Ogle was and where it is today. About 4 years ago, when I decided that I would start my own company, where we started Domestic Airways, and we had needed office space at Ogle. It was very difficult for us to have a room somewhere, an office room, close by to the airside. So the OAI has granted us a small portion of land. I think it was just about 25 by 30. For
Feet
us.
we talking about?
That's right, and that would have been way over the road. It's not directly on your side. However, for our certification process, that was the only option we had at the time, and we so accepted that. We had to pay a rent for that. We were allowed to build a little office, which we had erected a container office basically. Subsequently, we had a problem with one of our airplane, and our operations was not, as it used to be, and that asked us basically to remove our container.
Who is this they?
OAI. Well, if OAI, basically Ogle Airport Inc., which is controlled by the Korea group, which more or less it's family oriented, so to speak. However, moving on from that stage, where we did move our office and trying to regroup our company and also further established, there is land that is available right now, but the cost at which the land is available is very exorbitant for us, whereby we haven't been in the business for too long. As such, we are more or less or rather invest into airplanes, and if it's possible for us to get our own plot of land, which maybe 3 years, 5 years ago was a lot cheaper than the cost.
Now, did you have that opportunity 5 years ago to apply for land?
We did have the opportunity, but at the time we were majoring first on our certification process to get our license going, rather than pay emphasis on buying land and erecting hangars and so forth. So the challenge we're facing is basically the value for this land went up to 300-400% than it used to be, and it's very challenging for us to pay for 100 foot by 350 feet. They're about $14 million, and that's a lease for 15 years, which annually we still have to pay a fee which goes up by 10%. And that's only for the lease agreement. Then you have to build your own taxiway, or pay for the taxiway, which is very costly, and which they don't allow the operators to do, because one of their company does contracting, so they also do that, which is about a cost of over $10 million. Then you'll have to eventually fill up your land, erect your hangar, which will run you, for me, like a small operator of one plot of land, over $60 million. So at this stage, to do that, it's really hard.
All right.
Chris, I wonder if I could.
Hold on. Let me.
All right.
The business is expensive business.
Yeah, no
It
doubt about that.
it's expensive business.
Aviation is expensive
So,
business, right?
yeah.
But the thing is, you can't link the land to that process, and
Let's say to what process?
that aviation is is an expensive business. Now, airplanes and equipment, they're all expensive, but the land, you cannot sell a hangar plot or have the person leasing it, or the company leasing that plot for 13.5 million, and you're not developing, or 14 million, or whatever million, and you're not doing any sort of developmental work on the land. The land is a piece of swamp.
Jerry, let me ask you. You've heard what these gentlemen have said their experience has been. I didn't ask you, Roraima Airways, whether you have the same experience, but let's assume it's common.
No, I
Is-
don't have Roraima actually don't have any problems. I just want to make that very clear. Roraima don't have any problems.
The issue, as you understand it, is it a problem with Ogle Airport Inc., the company, or is it a problem with the Coraios?
To answer that, I would need to let me give me an opportunity. Just go a little bit back, and what I'm about to say to you, I feel bad in having to say it, because for 20 years as a private sector leader in Guyana, I have worked very hard, I believe, to try and promote and to bring the private sector to a place where the image that we are driven by money and driven by cutthroat business, and that we could trust each other and that we could work in a way in the interest of Guyana, and that we could work in good faith and trust each other. So what happened, Chris, is airports are not regular business. And I hear people say this is business, but this is not regular business. Airports are by its very nature regulatory agencies. And so in the world, there's a big protection against airlines owning and managing and dominating airports, particularly because of the anti-competitive issues that evolved. So many years ago, Ogle Airport was about to be closed because it didn't meet international standards. And the ICAO was getting very worried because it was a very small airport. So either the government put the money in or the private sector put the money in. So 5 of us got together, and in good faith, 5 competitors, Air Services, Trans-Guyana, Megdisi Aviation, Cayman Sankar Aviation, and Roraima. And we got together with the intention that we will form a company and we will put a proposal to government to develop this airport. But
was it develop and regulate, or separate?
Develop and manage it.
But not regulate.
Regulate comes from the civil aviation in terms of the airport got to meet standards set by the civil aviation. So there's a different issue. But daily management, there's a high level of regulations that come from an airport on a daily basis. You can park your plane here, you can't park your plane here, you can move, and so on and so on. So when the 5 of us got together, the intention was that because of the issue of vested interest and anti-competitive behavior, the 5 of us were meant to be the people who will keep that balance. And so a decision was taken that the 5 of us will be the people with the ordinary shares who will sit on the board and control the policy of this OAI company, that will keep it in the balance, and so that no one company will have the advantage, so that vested interest and dominance could start to happen to one airline over the next. And when we started, that was the general principle. Now, we know that we needed more money, and so that the intention is when more investors come in, the investors will come in with preferential shares, so that they will get their dividends. So the more money you put, you will get more dividends, but it don't mean that you will have more control over the daily operations of the airport, particularly because of the danger of that, exactly what these boys are talking about.
But let me come in here.
Yes.
Aren't you saying that is a Burbis bridge company model?
Well,
Same kind of thing, a small group controlling the equity and the preference shareholders having no vote?
Well, particularly because airports are a regulatory agency, it was very important that these fierce competitors kept an eye on each other, so that you don't have one person having a dominance at the airport.
Isn't it danger that they become a cartel?
Well, it could, but because of the fierceness of the competitors, there's no way that Roraima, and actually you could very well be right in that sense, because during that process, that Maserati, Air Services, Yaqub Ali actually wrote the airport and said, when they wanted more money, that he is prepared to bring money into the project, but the money will come to Air Maserati and Sons. And there's a letter now that Air Services just delivered to us, showing us how OAI rejected the money coming from Maserati and Sons, because they were not one of the original shareholders, and that they were told that the money have to come through Air Services. So they didn't change the balance of power, so to speak. But I will tell you today as we moved along, you have the shareholders now, and it happened over a period of time. The first thing happened is that the Cayman Sankar Aviation sold all their shares to the Coraya Group, and those shares did not come through Trans-Guyana. Over a period of time, we saw Coraya Mining become a shareholder. We saw the Coraya Maintenance Company become a shareholder. We saw the Michael Coraya Engineering, the delivery of free shares to Malcolm Chanasu, so he became a shareholder. And so you had Michael Correa, sister Nikki Correa. You had Nikki.
Is that story about free shares entirely accurate? Wasn't it for services that they may have performed in the past?
No. They are paid a salary. They are paid a salary, and this was it was gifted. It was you could call it a bonus. You call it what it is, but the person was given these shares and became a shareholder. And so slowly, what happened is that the original investors in this project was being sidelined by these people who were coming in and waited on one side of the operator's fence. And so what started to happen, the anti-competitive dominance prevailed itself. For example, I think everybody remember the incident when the truck drove through the gate at Ogle with the fuel issue. Because the fuel was controlled by the Correa Group. They were selling this fuel, and every day they were raising the price on this fuel. They were written to 3 or 4 times by Roraima Air Services and Wings Aviation about this issue.
Those issues have been fairly well, as you said.
Right, but I want to make
the
the point.
ventilated. What I want to get at, because when you have a site as big as this, it's easy to run out of time. What it is, you started by calling for the government to intervene. What exactly do you wish the government to do? What's the outcome you're
We
looking
need to
for?
stop the anti-competitive and dominance of one side on this issue. This is now created. It is now oppressing.
Yeah,
the
but I'm
aviation
asking everybody.
development.
I'm asking
Yes.
everybody.
Yeah,
For me-
And as you know,
Yeah.
there is a competition commission. Is that not where you ought to go?
What the government should do to start with is to implement the review panel, to look into the governance structure of the airport.
Just for clarification, the review panel is a mechanism set out in the lease agreement between
That's
the
right.
government and Oakley Airport Inc.
That's right. And that review panel hasn't been in place for probably since the inception, right?
Never been. Right?
Never been in place. So
Isn't that a fault of the government? Is that a fault of OAI?
It's a fault of the government.
So shouldn't you be calling on the government to do this, Mr. Phillips?
We should be.
And we
But-
did.
And that's what we're doing right now. And you say that you ask the question if any one of us have, if there's a problem with the Correa Group as per se or Oakley. I personally, since I've been to Oakley Airport, you wouldn't believe this, I've never met none of the Correas except I think Nicole once. So I have nothing personal against them. I just don't think it's good business practice to have my competition be my regulator. I mean, there's nowhere in the world.
But you said the regulator is not Oakley Airport. It's not the
Not-
Correa. The regulator is
all right, I
civil
know
aviation.
you're getting confused, and this is because of a simple fact that Correa Group is chaired by Mike Correa. OAI is chaired by Mike Correa. So he's wearing many hats, and he's also the president for the Aircraft Owners Association.
But neither of them, none of those three, is the regulator.
They regulate the airport.
They
make rules.
Well,
They-
Jerry
they-
was saying they operate the airport.
Exactly.
But in
some
in
extent.
managing an airport daily, there's
Correct.
regulations that happen on a daily basis.
Are those regulations? As you said, we need to clear it because it's a technical issue.
That's right.
Are those regulations carried out in the name of or sanctioned by the Civil Aviation Authority?
The airport is approved by the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority. It's licensed under the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority to operate. So the regulatory aspect of it is covered by the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority, which gives the airport the tools to work with to actually run the airport on a day-to-day, in kind of like regulatory in a way that
Mhm.
it gives them that power. It's similar to, okay, well, our company, all the companies that will operating commercially, we have to follow what they call an operations manual, and it's approved by the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority. So they give you that. You have to follow the rules that are set there, that are approved by the Guyana Civil Aviation Authority. So anything that goes on, any movement of any aircraft or any building construction, anything that happens at that airport is actually done by OAI, but the GCA overlooks it and make sure. Jerry, you can probably give a little bit more insight on that to explain it and clear that up.
But the point I was making is day-to-day management of the airport in terms of, and the operators agreement is a good example of that, where, like, and the lease, where they will tell a competitor like Hopkinson, who's also into mining and into the planes, they want you to give them their business plan. So every part of your business plan is now exposed to your competitor.
Is the lease approved by Civil Aviation
The
Authority?
lease don't have to be approved by Civil Aviation. No.
No, but should it be?
Well,
If the lease gets into regulatory matters, and if regulatory matters is the purview of the Civil Aviation Authority,
but I think we are mixing up what is called statutory regulations and airport day-to-day regulations. There's a difference between that. One is
I am
statutory
saying-
regulations, and one is day-to-day management
but as you said,
positions. Yes.
in day-to-day matters, you encroach on regulatory issues because you're talking people's lives. And let's face it, you want as strict regulations as possible. Airports are shut down at the least sound of anything internationally. So the point I'm getting at is where in the management arrangement, including the lease and the operating rules, where is the line of demarcation between management and regulation? And does Civil Aviation Authority control that part that falls within regulation?
Let me make this very clear to you. None of us have any problem with Ogle and its development, where it came. It's wonderful. None of us have a problem with Ogle Airport complying with international regulations. We have a problem with governance, anti-competitive, and dominance. If Temeri Airport, for example, if CJIA was controlled by Caribbean Airlines, if the management, the day-to-day management of the CJIA was controlled by Caribbean Airlines, you know what would happen to Dynamic, you know what would happen to Insular, you know what would happen to Suriname Airways, where you park, what you do, and especially if they control your fuel, and if they are telling you, they want to know what prices you're charging, what is your business plan, what is your corporate secrets, and you have to give that to your competitor. That is a major issue. If the government asks me for that, if any of the information that's being asked at Ogilvy, I'd have no problem with it. But it's when it is being asked by your competitor, a competitor who got access to this information. When they have access to this information, it makes us extremely uncomfortable.
So that is regulatory information or management information?
A lot of it is management information, but because by its very nature, an airport, for example, if you park your vehicle in the ramp and your vehicle is in the wrong position, and you have to, for example, you can't start your planes in a hangar, you can't do this, you can't do that. Those are regulations set by the airport. But when an airport is managed by your competitor, and then your competitor now is demanding strategic business statistical data from you, and have access to that information, all your passengers, how many hours you're doing every month, how much fuel you're taking every month, controlling the price of landing. When your competitor is doing that, we have a problem. A big problem.
To interject there, that information can be used to regulate.
And to operate against you because
Absolutely.
it's commercially sensitive.
Very commercially sensitive information.
If government acts that, there's no problem.
Now, and Orlando, please make sure you stay in this conversation. Does it matter whether it's one operator that controls it or five? Is it bad for operators to control the airport?
I would prefer no operator to control the airport. But if it's more than one, I think that can slide. But still, it's still a gray area. But when one operator is controlling the airport,
We need a balance in all force.
And all of you have none of you own shares in Ogle Airporting.
We
no,
right?
no,
So you're really outside. You just a passenger,
just a passenger.
a customer.
That's right.
Do you like the idea of any airline operator controlling, even 2, 3, 4, 5, controlling the airport?
Well, with the experience that we're having, it's a bad idea.
Correct.
It's a very bad idea.
I would say a little something a little different, but it all relates back to the current situation. However, I wouldn't say that at this stage taking Ogle Airport as it is, with the Coraias owning 60% of the share, so that means that the airport is not totally a private airport and is not totally Coraia's airport. They have owned 60% shares, and the additional shares, basically, the government also would have injected lots of funds into the development of the airport. However, you can't totally say that you don't want them to be a part or in
They're a
terms-
stakeholder, but
they're
should they be the chief operators?
That's right. There should be the authority, and we are lobbying also for the authority to step in to that the airport should be managed by a government agency.
And I think we've said that. We know under the lease agreement the airport is supposed to be operated as a public aviation facility.
Correct.
It should take account what it's supposed to do. It's part of your social fabric. It's part of your communication. It's part of your national cohesion, to use a popular word. And we've said the government has abdicated his responsibility in that regard.
Yes.
I think we've said that because,
Yes.
I mean,
Well,
it may not have happened. The five may be looking at each other and say, look, if you only increase your fare, we're going to lower ours. And
what we the small operators, and I think what everybody is advocating, is equality, fairness, and transparency, and equal opportunity for everybody at that airport.
you have a situation, you've said the Coraias have 62% of the shareholding in Ogle Airport Inc. If you were to measure it in terms of the number of aircraft, what percentage of aircraft?
I think the
Does it
total
correct?
airplanes at Ogle is about 53, and they're right now they're 90%. They're 90% of the operators at Ogle controlling 95% of the planes at Ogle that are up in arms against the current anti-competitive environment that is thrusted upon us at the moment.
So if this is true, that the Coraias own about 5% of the aircraft, 5-10%,
Right, that's correct.
how come they have such a dominant control over the 90-95%?
Well, according to Jerry said that they fell asleep at the wheel.
Yeah, so this whole
I
thing,
hate
right?
when pilots falling asleep. Yeah?
We came in within the last 6 years. There's been an increase in the number of new operators at Ogle. Now, the consortium, the setup of Ogle Airport Inc., well, Jerry, he was part of that. So through that process, there has been an increase in the shareholdings of the Coraia Group into that airport.
It was never meant to get here. It was done in good faith. It was never meant to get here. It was meant to, and this airport was meant to be our domestic hub. This airport was meant to be a place where our domestic operators could grow. When we started, for example, I remember when Air Services started, they had a little shed with a latrine in the back. So Air Service took 50 years or 40 years to get where they are. We took 20 years to get where we are. We operated a little place at one time.
Same
So
with
what
Coraia
is happening now
TGA.
with this development at Ogle, in the first instance, Chris, the international operations were supposed to happen on the western side, so to speak, or maybe the northern side of the airport, so that you didn't have the mixing of the international and the domestic. So the domestic was being squeezed out of Ogle Airport. Ogle Airport is where the domestic operation grew. And what is happening now, because international operations will bring more money to the investors, so the more emphasis is being put in the international operations. And as they will tell you, so they don't have space.
Let's look at it. Okay, we know that the Coraias control a very small percentage of the fleet. What about the leases of land? Where is that controlled?
Okay, OEI, Ogle Airport Inc., they control that.
Yeah, but who to whom have the lands been allocated on the lease.
We've asked the government to do that audit on those lands. There are lands there, for example, they would give you in your lease to say that if you get this land in 2 years, you have to develop it. But and we have actually, we met with the minister, with Minister Patterson today, and they're actually going to look at it now with a very in-depth look at where those lands are. All the lands on outside of the airport, on the inside of the airport, and there are lands there, for example, that was leased over the last 5 and 6 years and not developed, maybe even longer than that. And so the government is going to look at that. In fact, the government in 2011 had stopped the free distribution of land at Ogle, and the government had then put a restriction that cabinet must review all of, because of this particular problem. But I think with the change of government, that kind of slipped, because Air Services particularly had made a tremendous call on the government to look at the issue of land because they felt discriminated. It wasn't Roraima or these boys as yet. And so this is a very serious problem for us, how we got here. And part of the problem is, of course, if you look at the Aircraft Owners Association, by its very nature, it's called Aircraft Owners Association. The members of that association are really aircraft owners. You look at that Aircraft Owners Association now, you find Malcolm Chanasu, who don't own airplanes. You find Kit Nascimento, who don't own airplanes, now sitting as a director of the Aircraft Owners Association. And Fora, that is now sitting on the Private Sector Commission as the aviation representative of the... So, and those things didn't happen with the approval of the large number of operators because they just didn't know. And so those are the type of things that I believe festered over a period of time that created this dominance at Ogle and dominance in the aviation sector, which is about to be broken.
How?
Well, I think the aircraft owners the 10 aircraft owners are now going to be a lot more vigilant, and they are going to become active members of the Aircraft Owners Association. They are going to be and then with the advent of the new organization that was formed, NATA, aircraft owners will become a member of NATA, just like the air traffic controllers and the pilot body and the engineer body. And so the aviation sector will now have not only a business vested interest representation at the level of aircraft owners, but will now have a representation across the board. So I think the landscape for aviation representation will change with this new dispensation.
That's on the regulatory side.
In a general sense, yes.
But you have, and you know, the private sector doesn't come out good, doesn't look good at all in this.
Yes.
Because here it is, a former, still a leader of the private sector.
Yes.
Sitting for 19 years as chairman,
president
of the aircraft owners. He is both, and Mr. Michael Correa, you'll have an opportunity to come and discuss your side of this. He sits, he's both a user and a regulator at Ogle Airport.
Correct.
He's part of the management, he's part of the managed. There must be something wrong about that kind of model, is it? Certainly.
Yeah.
Now, you're calling for government intervention. Recently, President Granger went to the Ogle Airport facility. So there was some launch of some aircraft by the Correas. And President Granger, I don't know whether he called, he announced, he suggested. Well, it is in his power. So a suggestion from an executive president who can turn up at the convention center and say, I name this thing Arthur Chung, is more than a suggestion. Did President Granger consult with anyone of you all?
No.
No, nothing.
Should he have consulted?
I would like to say yes, but I will say to you, when we heard it, we were also shocked. But we know, and I believe sincerely in my heart, that President Granger meant no harm. I don't think that I don't think he took all of the dynamics into consideration and the anti-competition.
There is no playing around this. There is either consultation or there is no
I'm
consultation.
Saying to you, no, they were not.
And our constitution calls for consultation.
Right.
A major matter like that, you major stakeholders, you expect to be consulted. You have a right to be consulted. Is not itself a governance issue? If this goes through, this airport is now carrying the name Correa. Does that add to the anti-competitive issues?
As we stand right now, the operators, they're not consulted when decisions are made by OAI. That actually brings you back to the
You're in a bad
the whole-
situation. Neither the
that's right,
government
the-
consulting you, nor
the document, the operators agreement. We were not consulted, and so you could see there isn't any consultation process from the airport itself.
Jerry, you've been in business. You were saying that you all were shocked. Not many things shocked you, Jerry. I know you a long time ago. What Eugene Correa? What has been his contribution to the development of the aircraft industry in Guyana?
I have been an aviator for 40 years. I've been the head of the Army Air Corps.
You were a teenager then.
Yes. And I have never in all my career ever heard about Eugene Correa. I believe that in my history lessons and looking at the government of Guyana, we knew that he served both when the colonial government had removed the standing government at the time,
The elected government.
the elected government. They put in an interim administration, and he was part of that colonial movement that removed the nationalists. He was anti-national. He was a person who was part of a group of people that removed that fill in when
An
the
elected government,
was.
yes.
And so I'm not very pleased. I'm not very impressed with that as a fact. But in terms of his contribution to aviation and being a pioneer, I think a lot more research is necessary on that. But the point is that I think you made the point. And I sincerely, and we spoke with President Granger, and when this thing first happened, Chris, all the operators were shocked. But you know what? Because we did not want to have a confrontation, or we did not want to have a conflict with our president. A lot of us decided, you know what? Maybe we could swallow this pill. Maybe. But I'll tell you what, Chris, in two or 3 days after this announcement was made, an email came to me by accident. An email invited me to a board meeting of the OAI. And in that email was the agenda for a meeting and an attachment. When Mazhar Ali, Captain Mazhar Ali from Air Services, called me, he said, Captain Kabar, are you coming to this meeting? And I said, what is it? He said, you better read that agreement. This is the most draconian document that you're taking to be approved today. So when I opened this document, first of all, I opened the agenda. And the agenda said, the agenda item was approval.
When did you get the agenda?
About 2 days before about a day before the meeting. And that it was this document was going to the board for approval, not review, not consideration, not discussion, but approval. And when I read this document, this is 3 days after President Granger, or a couple of days after President Granger made his announcement. So the two major items on the agenda, they wanted the board to approve the name change to Correa, and second of all, hastily, and second of all, that we must sign this document that says we must all put a lien in our planes to the airport, so they have a lien in our planes, our buildings, our equipment, so that if we owe them any landing fees, they could seize our planes. And I thought, how presumptuous could our competitor, could an operator of this airport demand that his competitors sign over their planes and their hangars because it is done somewhere else in an airport that may be controlled by a government. And at that point in time, Chris, we all recognized, and at that time, I believe, every single operator wrote a letter. Every single operator. There are 10 operators at Ogle, 9 of them wrote a letter rejecting that name
Everyone
change.
but the Correas.
Correct. To say that we, and after consideration, that we reject this name because we see it amplifying the anti-competitiveness. And then second of all, this operator's agreement. This operator's agreement was so draconian. Now, if this operator's agreement, if the CGIA asked me to sign an agreement like that with government, I may not even bat an eyelid because it's government. But when you're a competitor, when people who have access to your information then tells me that I must tell them who is my customers, their telephone name, their telephone numbers, what am I, if I'm late, why I'm late, what is the cargo in my plane, and I mean it's a whole menu of things that were demanded from the operators without consultation, and it was going to the board for approval. So at that point in time, I'll say to you that the operators said enough is enough.
Chris, one of the things I know you're pressed with time, that I must say that since we have grouped ourselves together with the formation of NATA, And you
which
hear a
will
lot of-
represent more than the
That's right. Yeah, well,
aircraft owners.
That's right. Yeah, correct. And you hear all these stories here, and a lot of things have been said in the public domain about what's happening. All in all, the positive side of it, that we actually engage the attention of OAI, and they are right now looking into our matters of concern or problems.
Who's our in this case?
The small operators predominantly, because our livelihood has been threatened.
In your perception of matters,
Yeah,
and your experience of matters, is that the bigger operators are the Correias,
that's right.
the Maserati,
Correct.
Air Services,
Yeah.
and Roraima.
Yeah, that's right. Well, actually, to be more definitive or specific, we've been talking to Mike Correa, the chairman of the board for OAI, on these matters that and the problems that we're facing. Now, prior to all of this, the door wasn't open to us to discuss anything. There was always a big no. No, we can't do this for you. No, we can't do that. We can't, So right now, they're making attempts in fixing these problems that we have as small
But
operators.
they haven't called me.
They haven't called Mr. Phillips.
Chris, just to say to you, the point is that for what could not be done in 3 or 5 years,
That's right.
is now being done in 3 or 4 days. So in 3 or 4 days, after the explosion happened, after this thing went public, suddenly the operators are being called in individually, and they're being promised the world. And in a way, we are happy that the operators are getting
But
an
let me
opportunity.
ask you this question.
To say something, but to say that there is no problem at Ogle and that Ogle was running smooth and all of that with that article in the paper in the Friday Stabroek business, that was not true.
When you met with Mr. Mike Correa, did he have any of the other directors there, independent directors, or just the Correa control directors?
Well, I don't want to say Correa control directors. When we met with him, the CEO, Mr. McDC, was there. Nikki Correa, she was there. Marcel Gaskin, they're all board members. So,
That's Transguyana.
well, they're part of that OAI.
Well, Mr. Marcel
Board of
Gaskin is not
directors.
He's not part of any. He's not part of the Correa group, is he?
No, I don't think so.
Now they're willing actually to give us to put a payment plan in place for the small operators who cannot afford to go and pay up front for these lease lands.
Can I ask you, Mr. Gavaya, whether that was a decision of Ogle Airport Inc., the directors of Ogle Airport Inc., or is it perhaps, as Captain John is suggesting, to create a wedge in your arrangement?
I think when it went public, and if you look at the press conference, when they claim that show me the evidence, I will say.
No, my question is.
Yes.
My question is,
yes.
This approach by Mr. Mike Correa and some other directors, was that a decision of the board of Ogle Airport Inc., in which, say, Maserati
was not consulted. So that was not a board. That was Michael Correa calling in the operators to
chairman,
try to
yeah.
silence them and to try to solve their problems within days.
Well,
That's
actually,
what
we have genuine problems, and now they're looking at it, and now they're taking it into consideration. They're looking at ways in which to solve these problems.
How do you feel, Mr. Charles, of just being an outsider, user, and user not in the bad sense of the word? Or would you have preferred that you be offered shares in the company like everybody else, all the other operators there?
Definitely, to whatever extent it is, because we are all stakeholders of the airport, and just to say that of the 10 operators, we are inclusive. So whatever decision has to be done or made, we would love to be a part of it, because it has to do with us and our present situation, and also our future position too. So that is why when we were part of the Aircraft Owners Association, who was headed by Mr. Mike Correa, and we could not have been, we weren't effectively or properly represented as small operators. We eventually stopped going to meetings, and then as time went on, with all the individual problems that everyone had together, we, with the suggestion and ideas by Ms. Annette and Captain Govaya, that's how actually NATO came into effect and was born, so to speak, with the intention for all the other operators to have a more collective effort,
A broad-based representation.
broad-based represented in the aviation sector.
But-
And let me just say this before we go, that basically it was mentioned and said that Captain Govaya is the spearhead of the group. I mean, he was obviously one of the founder member with his ideas and vision, but we're all leaders and we all take a responsible position as a member of NATO, all the 9 out of the 10 operators.
And the other thing is to say real quick that Captain Govaya and Mrs. Annette Arjun Martins, our president, they're both misleading us. That's not true. They are not. We're intelligent people. We understand what we're going through, and there is a serious problem at Ogle. And if we didn't seek out each other and to make that representation, we wouldn't have gotten anywhere.
You have 30 seconds, Mr. Phillips.
I personally wouldn't want shares in Ogle Airporting just to be part of the management clique. I would prefer an independent body manages Ogle Airport, because you're going to open a whole can of worms. Every operator that comes to Ogle has to get shares.
15 seconds. I know that's a challenge.
I am encouraged by the government response. I'm encouraged by our meetings with all the leaders, our respective industry leaders. And remember that there were $2 million went into this concrete at Ogle from the European Union through the government of Guyana.
$2 million US.
$2 million US. And so this is not only a private sector developed airport. And this was not developed for one group or one family. This was developed for Guyanese. This airport, Ogle International Airport, is owned by the government and people of Guyana. It's not owned by any one person or one company. You may have OAI is a private company. Right. Thank you very much.
Gentlemen, Captain Govaya, Mr. Serato Phillips, Orlando Charles, and Mr. Emil Jahan, thank you so much for coming on Plain Talk to give your perspective of some of the issues that are taking place at Ogle Airport Inc. I'm hoping the directors and certainly Mr. Michael Correa, I will be writing him to extend an invitation and any other directors he may wish to bring to address some of these matters. I want to say, operators and viewers, thank you and good night. I'll see you next Wednesday. We'll be discussing with some visiting dignitaries and the question of the death penalty and whether it is cruel and inhumane and should in fact be abolished. So until then, I'll see you next week at the same time, at the same place. Good night.